You know how whenever you hear of something bad happen to someone, you always think, that won't happen to me? Well, that isn't always the case. I always hear the mantra, keep your windows and doors locked. But since I live in the middle of nowhere, I never really understood the whole thing. Not until a week ago. I had just gotten home from grocery shopping with my daughter. I'm a single mother, 35, and I live in rural Arkansas. When we go shopping, it's not like if you forget to pick something up, you can just run back out and get it. Where I live, the store is so far, we have to bring a cooler so our perishables don't go bad on the way home. It was your typical Friday night. We had just gotten home from our bi-weekly shopping trip, and the sun had just started to go down. It was actually a beautiful night, so I was looking forward to letting the breeze run through the house. As we unpacked the car, I had that distinct feeling of being watched, and being a woman in today's day and age, you always have to have your head on a swivel, especially with your kid. As I carried the cases of water to the door, I scanned the tree line, and of course, saw nothing. My house is in the middle of a huge field, so the forest was around 200 yards from my back door. My daughter and I had just finished unloading the car, just as I got pitch black out. It was probably around 70 degrees with a gentle breeze, so I went around the house opening up the windows. As I started to make dinner, my dog Roxy started barking at the back door. Roxy is a 90-pound German Shepherd, and I consider her to be my guard dog. She'll let us know of anything outside, which is usually just the occasional coyote or squirrel, so when she was barking on this occasion, that's all I assumed it was. But Roxy barked way longer than usual, so I just told her to be quiet and go lay down. While my daughter and I were eating dinner, Roxy had her ears perked up and she was staring in the direction of the backyard the entire time. I finally asked her, "What is it, Rox?" And she took that as an invitation to run to the back door and start barking again. This time, I just let her out, as I trust she won't go too far. But the second I open the door, she takes off into the darkness. I yell out for her, and I see her now sitting in the middle of the field, staring off into the woods. At this point, I begin to feel uneasy, remembering that feeling of being watched that I had earlier. I quickly ran out and dragged Roxy back inside. By now, my daughter was ready for bed, so that's just what we did. I must have dozed off quickly, because I was awoken to the sound of Roxy barking once again. This time, I knew something was wrong. She never, and I mean never, barks like that in the quiet of the night. I slowly crept down the stairs as she was just going absolutely batshit over God knows what, when through the living room, I see the dark silhouette of a man, at least 6'5", at my back door, and he's just standing there. I wasn't sure if he had seen me, because I immediately ducked back onto the staircase. My heart began beating erratically. I could feel it in my chest like I never have in my life. I pulled out my phone to call the cops, but I didn't want to talk and make noise, and besides, it would take them over an hour to send someone out to me. I was on my own. Every single window in my house was open, as well as every door unlocked. The only way out of the situation was if I left the house. I felt like I had to make a decision right then. I slowly crept to my daughter's room and figured I didn't want to scare her, so I told her we were going on a surprise trip to Disney and that the only way we would be able to go is if we didn't make any noise on our way to the car. Yeah, I know, it seems pretty ridiculous, but it's great the amount of things a child will believe. I get her up and we both creep back down the stairs, and I ensure she doesn't make any sound. When we get to the bottom, I look at the back door, and my heart skips a beat, only to see the man is no longer standing there. I slowly go to grab my car keys when I can see him outside in the moonlight, pacing around my house. That's when I see he's clutching a big knife in his hand. Not only this, but now my daughter is starting to get impatient, wanting to go to Disney. All this time, Roxy is still going crazy. Thankfully, my daughter hadn't put two and two together at this whole situation, and I got ready to book it. I waited until the man was walking around the back of my house, and I grabbed my daughter's hand, and we rushed outside of the car, Roxy following right behind us. I spammed the unlock button, and the obnoxious Toyota unlocking beep rang out, and I was hoping he wasn't close. We hopped in, and I immediately locked the doors, and I started the ignition when all of a sudden, bang! The man had sprinted directly at my car and slammed his entire body into my door not even 3 seconds after I had closed it. I screamed, and my daughter started crying. As my headlights came on, the man walked over to the front of my car, slamming both fists on my hood. "You think this is a game?" He screamed this while boasting a nightmarish grin. It seemed like he had double the amount of teeth as a normal person would as he smiled. I threw the car into drive and slammed my foot on the gas. The man rolled onto my hood and slid off the side, and I took off down the street. I phoned the police, explaining everything that had happened. I told them I wasn't going back to my house alone, and they said they'd send officers out there as soon as possible. I had the cops meet me at a local farmer's market where I explained everything to them, from the time I got home to me running him over. Meanwhile, tears streaming down my face. The officer followed me back to my house, where of course, the man was long gone. There was no trace of him anywhere, and unfortunately, all the cop could really do was file a report. He recommended I stay elsewhere for the night, and that's just what we did. We found a motel that allowed pets, and after a 3-hour drive, we finally were able to get to bed. By the time I had hit the pillow, the sun was already starting to come up. We stayed in that motel for 3 days, and I had to explain to my work the whole situation, which thankfully my boss was very understanding. The next week, I ended up keeping my promise to my daughter, and I flew her out to Disney World, where we stayed for a well-needed vacation, while Roxy stayed with my parents. After that experience, we never heard from that man ever again, and since then, I always make sure my windows and doors stay locked anytime after the sun goes down. I graduated high school back in 2010. Now, before I get into this story, I just want to say that I've had over 10 years to move past this night, and although it is still a traumatizing memory, I feel comfortable enough to share it. A couple of days after I graduated, a few of my friends, I'll call them Mark, Tony, and Jeff, and myself, planned on throwing a big party as a lot of kids did. We decided to have it at my house. Well, my friends more or less made that decision. My mom is a lawyer, and my dad is a surgeon, so without trying to sound too braggy, my parents had a lot of money, and our house definitely reflected it. We had a big backyard with a really nice patio and an in-ground pool, as well as a jacuzzi, so naturally, it was a perfect place for an end-of-school party. My friends and I were notorious in our school for throwing the craziest parties, so we weren't too worried about not having enough people show up. Regardless, we wanted to advertise it as much as we could. We all used our Facebook accounts and made a bunch of posts about it, which included my home address, the date, and time of the party. Not only that, but we also put up flyers around town because we wanted as many kids to come as possible. Now, before you say anything, I know, posting flyers for a high school party around town definitely was not a smart idea, but you gotta realize we were just dumb teenagers trying to have fun. Anyways, the day of the party finally arrived, and we got everything set up, making sure the alcohol was plentiful. The party was scheduled to start at 6 p.m., which is immediately when we cracked open the beers. Let me point out that my parents were very chill and were cool with us drinking as long as they were home and nobody drove. Little did they know though, how many people were actually supposed to be coming. A few hours into the party, there were way more people than I anticipated. A lot of them I'd never seen before. Some of the guys I saw honestly looked like they were college age, which also meant that there'd be college age girls as well, and I was beyond thrilled. I was hanging out with Mark and Jeff in the jacuzzi, and we were just soaking it all in, when Jeff came over to us, clearly wasted, and started trying to tell us that he thinks there's too many random people showing up. We tried to just get him to calm down, which honestly wasn't too hard due to his inebriation. He got in the jacuzzi with us, and we continued our conversation. Jeff wouldn't give it up though. He told us he saw some people that looked way too old to be hanging around with high schoolers, and again, We just told him they were probably college kids. He said whatever, and got out of the jacuzzi to keep talking to the girl he was with. Now, we just brushed this off and continued with the party. I went over to one of the coolers to grab another beer when I think I saw who Jeff was talking about. There were these two guys sitting in our patio chairs, doing nothing. They seriously looked way older than college age, but since it was nighttime, I couldn't really tell. The weird thing was, they weren't even talking to each other. They were just sitting there in silence, and their facial expressions were just blank and emotionless. This kind of put me off, so I went up and asked if they wanted a beer or something, to which they replied no, they were just about to head out. That was when they just stood up and walked toward the gate out of my backyard, through the big crowd of people. I just stood there, feeling uneasy about these two random guys that were just on my patio. At that point, I was beginning to realize maybe Jeff was right in saying there were too many people in my house. Although it was 1 a.m. by now, so a lot of kids were making their way out, a lot of them thanking me for having such a great party, this and that. By 2:30, the last of the kids had left, so Tony and I headed to my basement to chill. I assumed Mark and Jeff had gone home with girls or something, as they usually did. I was still pretty drunk when we sat down on the couch, and I just took a deep breath. As fun as that night had been, being the host was really stressful, and with that amount of people, I was happy the cops didn't get called or anything like that. Tony and I ended up passing out on that couch, playing some drunk Madden, because the next morning our game was still on. In my hungover state, I texted Jeff and Mark, asking if they could come back over and help clean up. I assumed they were still asleep, so I just put my phone down and went to make breakfast. After that, I went outside and started picking up all the empties and stuff, and a few minutes later my mom came out. She said she just got a call from Mark's mom, asking if he had stayed over the night. I told her no, and that he was probably at one of his many girlfriends' houses. My mom repeated that to Mark's mom, and that was that. I went back in to get my phone to see if I'd gotten any responses, and I was pissed when neither Mark or Jeff had texted me back. I called both of them, and got no answer from either one. I was fuming that they were blowing me off. I woke up Tony, and he helped me clean up outside. I was complaining to him that we were being blown off, and he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said that both Mark and Jeff were supposed to stay at my house, and that they had told him later in the night they planned on sleeping on my living room couches. Now, when I was having breakfast earlier, my kitchen overlooks the living room, and neither of them were there. I ran back inside and asked my mom if she had seen either Mark or Jeff, and she said no. I told them that they were missing, and that she should call the police. Now, I'm known to jump to conclusions a lot and assume the worst, so my mom only took this with a grain of salt. She said to just be patient, and that they must have changed their minds, and that their phones must have died, and that everything was going to be alright. This seemed to calm me down for a while, but as time passed, and both Mark and Jeff's families reached out to us asking where they were, worry began to set in for everyone. Around dinner time, we decided to inform the police about 2 possible missing people, and around 30 minutes later, 2 officers showed up at my house. They did a search around my yard, and the only thing they found was a yellow Nike shoe in the front yard. It was Jeff's shoe. The only reason I had known that was because of how much we all made fun of him when he got them. I explained to them everything about the party, how there were at least 100 people there, most of them which were strangers to me. They were asking me about the last time I saw either of them, and I said it was right after I had gotten out of the jacuzzi, when I saw those 2 sketchy guys on my patio. They asked me to describe the guys, and I did, to the best of my ability. They also wanted names of as many people that were there that I knew of. Honestly, I can only give them like 25 names. There were just that many random people at my house. They thanked me and took Jeff's shoe as evidence. They were going to question everyone that I had named the next day, and to try not to worry about it, that they'd find them. A week went by, and there was no word on either of my missing friends. Naturally, I was a wreck, consumed by guilt. Thankfully though, my family was really supportive, and they said although we shouldn't have invited that many people, it wasn't my fault. I would just sit in my room most of the day and pray that they were alright. A few days later, the police showed up at my door. I was home alone, and they broke the news that we all dreaded. Jeff and Mark's bodies were discovered 5 miles from my house, buried pretty far in the woods. They each had several stab wounds on their necks and bruises all over their bodies. The police said that they used the scent from Jeff's shoe and had hounds search the area. Upon hearing this, I had no words, and I just collapsed to the ground in tears. Our families were devastated, and the entire town was in complete shock and mourned the losses. Nothing like this had ever happened in my area before, and nobody had any idea who would do something like this. Months went by, and long story short, they found them. 2 guys. When I saw their mugshots, my heart dropped. Sure enough, it was those guys from my patio. Based off my description of them, and with DNA evidence, the police were able to easily find them. During their questioning, they admitted to seeing the flyer for our party, and figured it would be a good opportunity to rip off some high schoolers for weed. But instead of actually selling anything to them, they planned to just rob them. Apparently, after I saw them, and they told me that they were leaving, on their way out, they asked Jeff and Mark if they wanted to buy some cheap weed, and sure enough, they said yes. The 4 of them went out and got into one of the guys' car, and when Jeff gave up the money, instead of giving them the weed, they told them to get the fuck out of the car. When they exited and the guy sped off, Mark kicked the guy's door, to which they stopped, got out, and beat up my friends. Instead of just leaving it at that, they threw them in the trunk and drove off, and took their phones so they couldn't call for help. It must have been at that point that Jeff's shoe fell off. After that, they drove them far out from any houses and dragged them into the woods. They didn't originally plan on killing them, they said, but when Jeff kept saying how they got their license plate and how they've had enough information to get them arrested, they decided it wasn't worth risking leaving them alive. So where they stood, the men pulled their knives and stabbed my friends to death and buried them right then and there. They left all sorts of fingerprints and DNA, leading to their quick capture. Both of them were charged with first-degree murder and given life sentences. This story is still one that haunts me to this day. They were my best friends, and I live with the guilt that I played a big part in their deaths. They had such a bright future ahead of them, only to lose it to 2 stupid drug dealers. I'm glad they were dumb enough to leave behind so much evidence, and that they will rot in jail for the rest of their lives. I used to love getting up early, but now, not so much. I work as an electrician, and my job starts early, between 5:30 and 6 in the morning. That means I'm always up around 4 a.m. every day, way before the sun comes up. I just find it so relaxing being up before everyone else. It's just a different feeling than nighttime. At that hour, you know most of your neighbors are still asleep, which gives kind of an eerie yet exciting atmosphere. If you get up early, you know what I mean. I've been doing this job for the last 15 years, so by this point, I'm used to all this. I just get up, eat real quick, get dressed, then pet my sleeping dogs goodbye, and I'm on my way. Usually at 4, I'm awoken by my alarm clock, but on this particular day, I just naturally woke up around 3:30. Honestly, I was surprised. I'm a really heavy sleeper, and once I'm out, I'm out. It'd take an earthquake or something to get me up. So anyways, it's 3:30, and I start to debate whether or not to try and sleep another 30 minutes or just get up and get ready, when I hear what must have woken me up. A big crash out by my backyard rings out, and I nearly hit the ceiling. I was so startled. So at this point, it's safe to say that I'm up for the day. Now, like you might expect, I rushed to see what the hell just made that noise in my yard at 3:30 in the morning. The way that my house is set up, if you're looking at it from an aerial view, my room is in the front left corner, meaning that I don't have a view of the backyard, so I had to go look from the small window of my bathroom to see. I also don't have that big of a backyard. It's about 40 feet from my back door to the tree line, so I didn't have to look far to scan the area. Now keep in mind, it's still pitch black outside. I had a motion sensor light which something had tripped, but even still, I couldn't see all too much. What I did notice, however, was my shed door, wide open. I know for a fact that it should have been closed, and there wasn't any wind that could have blown it open. Also, with the motion light on, this legitimately shook me to my core. I'm a 45-year-old man, and I built like a brick shithouse. If you had asked me on a normal day what I'd have done in this situation, I probably would have told you that I would go out there and beat the crap out of whoever was in my shed. But in the moment, there was no way I was going out there. I genuinely didn't know what to do. I can't just ignore the possible intruder in my shed. I was the only one who lived in the house. But what if they were armed? What if I confront them and I get shot or stabbed? It took me a solid minute of contemplation before I had the sense to just call the cops. I told the dispatcher there was a possible intruder in my shed, and she said she'd send an officer over and for me to lock my windows and doors. I thanked her and hung up. So now, I just had to wait in sheer horror of anticipation. My eyes were just glued to the shed, looking for any movement whatsoever, and there wasn't. Not for a few minutes at least. But when I see the red and blue lights approaching down my street, I saw who it was. A figure emerged from the shed doorway and just slowly walked out and across my yard towards the woods with no urgency at all. I don't know why, but that really freaked me out. If they were stealing stuff, I'd imagine they'd have just booked it. I ran to the door and outside to the officer, now in my driveway, and frantically told him the guy was headed in the woods. For the next 30 minutes, the police officer scanned the whole area, checked the shed, and looked for any trace of the guy, but found nothing. I was shocked. Not some 30 seconds before, this guy was just casually walking into the woods. There was no way he disappeared that quickly. Nevertheless, the cop just told me to lock my shed and house, and to keep an eye out, and to not hesitate to call back if I saw him on my property again. Frustrated and scared, I just thanked him. I head back inside, still shaken up, and proceed with my morning routine. So I do my usual petting of my dogs goodbye. Lucky for them, they had slept through that whole situation, bastards. After I pet them, I head back out into the dark. I walk across my yard to get to my truck, when in my peripheral vision, I see my backyard motion sensor light turn on again. My chest tightened, and when I turned around, there he was, the man. He was just a dark silhouette in the light, staring at me. Without thinking, I sprinted to my truck, hopped in, took off, once again calling the police, and explained what happened. An hour after I got to work, I called back the non-emergency line and asked them if they found the guy, to which they said no, they hadn't. This time, they even had 3 cops searching the entire area of woods around my house. Still nothing. They once again told me to keep everything locked and recommended even staying with someone else for a few days, because since nothing had been broken or stolen, there wasn't much they could do. I wish the story ended here, but unfortunately no, it gets worse. I lived hours away from any family member I could stay with, so I was kind of forced to stay at my house. For the days after, I didn't see the guy at all, but I would notice little things, like random branches and decent-sized rocks left in my yard, almost as his way of saying he's still watching me. At this point, enough was enough for me. I had gotten past the terror of this guy, because like I said before, I'm a big guy, so I figured if I was armed with a baseball bat or something, I'd be fine. After work one day, I started looking through the woods for any sign of him, and after about an hour of searching, I somehow barely noticed what looked like a metal handle that was painted brown to blend in with the ground. I went to poke it with my shoe when I had a horrifying realization. It was a handle to a trapdoor, not even 100 yards from my back door. There was absolutely no way I was opening it by myself. I freaked, ran back to my house, and once again called the non-emergency line and told them what I had just found. Within 10 minutes, an officer was back in my house, and I led him to the door. The cop opened it up, and what was inside made me beyond sick to my stomach. Underneath looked to be a big man-made hole, filled with blankets and pillows and empty cans of soup and other food. A better way to describe it would be the home of my stalker. As the officer investigated further, he found a camera and a fully loaded revolver under one of the blankets. At this point, he called another officer to my house, and he had me stay with him. I won't get into the details of all the police stuff that went on, but they did end up catching the guy that same day and confirmed he was the one living in the hole. Now, you might assume this guy was homeless, but no. I was horrified to find out this guy had a family and actually lived not too far from my house. During his questioning, he wouldn't say why he did what he did, or why he chose me to stalk and harass. I have no clue why he had that camera, which didn't even have a memory card, and I don't even want to know why he had the revolver. Honestly, I wish I could say every mystery was solved that day, but not all stories have a happy ending. The guy ended up going to jail for 5 years for stalking, which made me feel somewhat at peace. But how could anyone be at peace after an experience like that? The fact that basically one of my neighbors camped out underground in my backyard with a weapon for absolutely no good reason is something that will keep me up for a long time to come. I wish I had more answers, but honestly, I'm just glad nothing ended up happening to me or my dogs. That man obviously has some serious issues, and for him and his family, I hope that he gets the help that he desperately needs.